Donald Trump is the favorite to win the 2024 presidential election, and me and Gold Crown Politics are going to explain why. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another video with On Point Politics. Hit the like button and subscribe for more content just like this. And Gold Crown, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey guys, Gold Crown Politics here. On Point, thanks for having me on. Let's get this collaboration started.
All right. And so moving on to very, very important indicators, we can see Gallup, a pretty reliable pollster dating back all the way to 1948, basically the starting foundation of polling, did a series of polling on certain key issues and subjects. And notice that Republicans are favored on almost every single metric. So Donald Trump is going to be the favorite to win based off of these. US satisfaction is at an all-time low. The economic confidence is also at an all-time low. Party better able to keep America prosperous. Republicans lead on that question by 6 percentage points. Party being able to handle the most important problem, a 5-point lead there. So the Republicans are in heavy favorite to win based on these key indicators. And when looking at the demographic model based on what we think the vote shares are going to be with certain demographics, Donald Trump does actually get 318 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 220. He wins all the swing states fairly easily and actually narrowly picks off New Mexico in this forecast, with Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Maine narrowly staying in the Kamala Harris column. I also have developed a historical election model, which basically tracks the Gallup polling information going back to 1992 and the current polling for the two candidates at the national level. And you can see the person who wins on average has a composite score of 48. The lead is about a 5-point lead, and the party that loses tends to have a score of about 42. The average winner of an election gets 327 electoral college votes to the losers 211, and the average popular vote victory for the winner is around 3.6 percentage points. And right now the composite score for the Republicans is 53% to the Democrats 40. So Kamala Harris's party right now is below the average of the losing party composite score, and Donald Trump's party is way higher than the average composite score for a winning candidate. It's about a 13-point lead. And when you had pretty big leads like this of 9, 14, and 26 points, they were all landslide elections. And something very interesting to note, in 1996, you had a pretty lopsided election in those two categories. From 1996 to 1992, you had two very lopsided elections. In 2000 and 2004, you had very competitive elections. 2012, 2008, you had very big wins. And now 2020, 2016, you had two very, very close elections. And so if the pattern continues, the next election would have to be a pretty moderate victory for the winner in the electoral college. And now we're going to have Gold Crown go ahead and explain his election model and how he breaks down the presidential race.
So if you see here, guys, this is my polling bias model. I basically take into account the fact that Democrats typically are overestimated in the polls by quite a substantial amount. They were overestimated by 4.5 points nationally last election cycle. And so taking that into account, Trump leads this model by about 3.5 points. You can see he has been expanding his lead in this model. As you can see there, he's over 50% in terms of the national vote share. Things are looking really good for him. If we scroll down, I also have a second model that takes into account Kamala Harris's job approval. It's typically a very accurate measure of vote share, and I'm weighing her job approval to an R+1 electorate. I use 538 polls for her job approval, and Trump leads this model by about 3.8 points. That margin has been steadily rising. And then we can scroll down to my third model. This takes into account Donald Trump's favorability. He typically massively outperforms his favorability. People kind of freak out when they see, oh, well, Kamala Harris, she has a much higher favorability than Trump. But favorability is kind of less accurate than job approval. Favorability is more like a personality likability, whereas job approval is more like, asking people in these surveys, like if they actually approve of their, like if they'd vote for them. So job approval is more accurate, but favorability, we do take into account the fact that Trump typically massively outperforms it, and he's leading this model by about 2.2 points. That's been rising a little bit, as you can see there. And I average out those three models to get a an average of Trump plus 3.2. He's now crossed over the 3 point margin nationally. He's getting 50.5%. And things are looking really, really good for Donald Trump right now. He's getting 50.5%. Kamala's down at about 47.4%. Third parties are getting just over 2%. And so things are looking really good for Donald Trump right now. And we can scroll down and start looking at some of our combined state margins and start filling out the 2024 election map.
So, looking for the safe Republican states, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, as well as all of Nebraska, except the second congressional district, Alaska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, and South Carolina, as well as Maine's second congressional district, which in our combined margins is just at a 17-point win for Donald Trump. Looking at the state of Texas, a 15.1 percentage point margin there for Donald Trump. So he is taking the state by a safe margin. And looking at the Iowa and Ohio margins, they are both above 16.8%, putting them in the safe Republican category, giving Donald Trump an initial lead of 189 safe electoral college votes in this video. California will presumably be in the safe column, as well as the District of Columbia, Maryland, Massachusetts, and Vermont in this video. Now, Gold Crown, go ahead and fill out the likely Republican and likely Democrat states.
So, starting with some of the likely Republican states, we'll start with the Rust Belt swing state of Wisconsin. This is a margin of plus 6.9% for Trump, likely Republican as an average between our two models. Now, this state, the Badger State, historically speaking, it's been a very rightward trending state. It's very white working class heavy, and Trump, of course, is notorious for improving with that voting bloc. This election cycle, it is looking like white voters as a whole will trend to the left. But according, if you reweigh the polls in Wisconsin to its projected electorate, it is looking like a pretty substantial victory for Trump in the state. We can look at its Rust Belt neighbor next, Michigan. That is a 5 point victory for Donald Trump in the state, now likely Republican. This state has a decent amount of African Americans. Trump is showing a lot of strength, especially for a Republican with black voters in the crosstabs. You also have a pretty decent union electorate in the state of Michigan. And so that is a very good sign for Donald Trump. He very well could win the state by a likely margin. And then we can look at Pennsylvania. This is a 6.5 point victory for Donald Trump in the state, the most important state in this election with its 19 electoral votes. Pennsylvania, it is the most racially diverse state of the entire Rust Belt. That's why I definitely think that Trump will most likely, see a more favorable margin in that state of all the three Rust Belt states. But we'll have to see. He's winning the state pretty easily. We can then look down south to the state of North Carolina. The Tar Heel state, this is a 9 point victory, just under a 9 point victory for Donald Trump as an average between our two models. This state, it's not a very elastic state. It typically votes about 6 points to the right of the country, and that margin about Trump plus 9. If he's leading by about 3 points nationally, that's right about where I would expect to see the state. Then we can look at the state of Georgia. This is a 7 point victory for Donald Trump. It is a likely Republican margin. This state, it's about a 30% African American electorate. And so, how that voting bloc moves is going to have a significant impact in terms of the final margin for the state. And in Georgia, historically, it's been a very leftward trending state, but we could very potentially see a trend reversal depending upon, how well Trump does with black voters, especially black men. He's showing a lot of strength with them, particularly in the crosstabs. Then we can look out west in the Sun Belt to the swing state of Arizona. This is a 7.5 point victory for Donald Trump. It is likely Republican. Now, this state is interesting. It's the only swing state of any swing state that is a border state. Arizona specifically, immigration is or Arizona is the only swing state where immigration rivals the economy as one of the top issues. And so that, in my opinion, will push the state to the right. It's going to be voting about 4.5 points to the right of the nation according to this margin. And then we can look up north to the swing state of Nevada. This is just over a 7 point margin of victory for Donald Trump. He is improving pretty substantially with Hispanics and particularly the working class voters in the state. It's also a very racially diverse state, has a decent amount of African Americans, Hispanics, and Asian voters as well. And Trump is showing a lot of signs of strength with all of those voting blocks. And so a state like Nevada, especially the fact that it is also bottom five in terms of college education, I would certainly expect this state to see a very hard trend to the right. And then we can start filling out some of the likely Democratic states. Let's start first with the state of New York. This is an 8.5 point victory for Kamala Harris as an average between our two models. Now, that would be a very hard trend to the right if that margin were to hold up. This state is pretty racially diverse, and on these, if you pay attention to these margins, guys, like Trump is improving the most in states that are more racially diverse. New York being no exception to that. In New York, in particular, though, this I think is the wild card in terms of a state like New York. It's a very heavy union electorate. It is number two in the nation in terms of union workers by percentage. And Trump is showing incredible signs of improvement with union voters. So I would certainly expect to see that at the very least the state trends pretty hard to the right. We also can look at the state of Washington in the Pacific Northwest. This is an 11.5 point victory for Kamala Harris. Similar to New York, Washington actually has a pretty union heavy electorate as well, but it differs in terms of its racial demographics. It's much more white, but similar to New York, it's also very college educated. I think that Harris will do pretty well in this state. And then we can look at Oregon. This is a 9 point margin of victory for Kamala Harris. Oregon has pretty similar demographics to Washington. I think it's still going to trend to the left. Then we can take a look at Colorado. This is an 8.5 point victory for Kamala Harris. This state has been a very leftward trending state. It's very white and very college educated. And so I would certainly expect to see that the state would continue its leftward trend. And then we can also take a look at the state of New Jersey. This is just over 5 points for Kamala Harris in the likely Democratic column. Now, this state is actually very similar to New York in terms of its demographics. It's more racially diverse. It's also a very union heavy electorate. I'm personally very bullish on New Jersey potentially going under likely Democratic. I could see it, to be honest with you, as a lean Democratic state. But our models combine as an average to about 5 points for Kamala Harris. And I do believe that that is all of the likely Republican and Democratic states.
Filling out some of the additional ones, Florida will obviously be in the likely column at about 13 to 14 points for Donald Trump, as well as Illinois being around an 8 and 9 point win for Kamala Harris in the state, as well as Hawaii being in the likely Democrat column, including Connecticut, Delaware, and Rhode Island also being in the likely Democrat column alongside Maine's first congressional district, essentially putting Donald Trump on the top with 312 safe and likely electoral college votes, giving him a very easy win in the electoral college to Kamala Harris's 191 safe electoral college votes with the likely states. Now, New Mexico in our combined margins, give or take, looking at them, is about a 1.8 percentage point win for Kamala Harris. Now, you do have the Albuquerque area that tends to be a little bit more liberal than most places, but New Mexico has a majority Hispanic population. As we can see here in our demographic estimated model, he is actually narrowly picking off New Mexico, but based on our modeling, he is narrowly picking off the state, or at least Kamala Harris is. But funny enough, in my polling average, he actually is narrowly ahead in my New Mexico average, actually by close to this margin, believe it or not. So that is quite interesting to also point out as well. Looking at Virginia, another key battleground state. Virginia here, just a 2.5 point win in our average here, bringing Kamala Harris to 209 electoral college votes. Very, very narrow win in the state of Virginia here for Kamala Harris. Definitely way closer than last cycle. Donald Trump would improve with some college educated voters by a pretty decent amount, as well as doing well in the west side of the state. Clearly, Donald Trump improving with African Americans would help him in a place like Virginia as well. Nebraska's second district is a very, very narrow flip to Donald Trump. The district has been running left off a cliff and the polling hasn't looked great, but based off of our modeling averages, Donald Trump in Nebraska second would be doing just well enough to barely, barely flip it back from 2020. Maine at large is currently a 1.1 percentage point victory for Kamala Harris. Very, very competitive, essentially within the margin of error. Both campaigns' internals reportedly show a very, very close race in Maine at large. And Kamala Harris is actually spending money in Maine and New Hampshire. The fact she's even spending money there is not a great side for her campaign. But I would definitely say she's the favorite to win Maine at large. And Minnesota and New Hampshire, combining both of our election models, are both narrowly in the tilt Democrat column. If they were to both flip, Donald Trump would be winning 327 electoral college votes to Harris's 211, which, quite funny enough, is the exact average winning margin in the electoral college for a winner and a loser based off of my historical election model. But based on our current margins, Minnesota and New Hampshire are both 0.1 percentage point victories for Kamala Harris in this video. And so, according to our combined averages, Donald Trump is winning 313 electoral college votes to Kamala Harris's 225. Gold Crown, do you have any closing comments?
Well, in the final stretch of the final month of this election cycle, things are looking very good for Donald Trump right now, regardless of if he is able to flip the states of Minnesota and New Hampshire. Things are looking really good for him right now. For Kamala Harris to win, she would have to pull off one of the biggest upsets really in American political history. And so things are looking exceptional for the former president right now. On Point, thanks so much for this great collaboration. And thanks for watching, guys.
Thank you so much, Gold Crown, for coming on. And guys, make sure to hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this. And we will be seeing you guys in the next video.